Oh, you've got that. You've unmuted. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome, and I'll hand you over to our President, Fazana, to do the formal welcome.
Good morning, ladies. And we've got one gentleman here today, which is not very usual. Welcome. Happy New Year. Welcome to our first general meeting of 2023. I'm so pleased to start off the year with two very distinguished guests today, Dr. Maggie Semple and Nicola Williams. I would now invite our program coordinator, Eve Middleton-Kelly, to introduce our guests and host this morning's program. Thank you.
Thank you, Farzana. Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. It's been great. This is our first one, this GM. Something's wrong with the... Yes, I think. Okay. Are we all right now? Great, thank you very much. So, as I was saying, welcome everyone. Last one we had in November, some of you said that you could not see the speakers because we were all sitting down. So what we're going to do this time, as you see, is have us up on the screen to make sure that everyone in the room has no problem in seeing us. And obviously you'll be able to hear us. I don't know if anybody else has a problem, but I've got an echo. Have you got an echo? Yeah, there is an echo. Also, I think you could not have helped noticing that we took your other comment about the space we had last time to heart. So I hope that today you really enjoyed the extra space we had in the whole of India and Pakistan, because I think that it does make a difference for everyone to be comfortable. I have two wonderful speakers today. We have been meeting over the past couple of years, having the most splendid, interesting lunches. And I think you will find that both ladies are really inspirational in what they have achieved. Nicola Williams is a British barrister specializing in criminal law. Since 2009, she has been a part-time Crown Court judge sitting on the London and South Eastern Circuit. She was the first service complaints ombudsman for the UK Armed Forces, and believe it or not, urged the Ministry of Defence to tackle racism in the armed forces, so quite an achievement. She is also a fellow of the RSA and a former chair of the BBC Regional Advisory Committee for London. Nicola was listed as one of the 100 most influential Black people in the UK and won a Cosmopolitan magazine Woman of Achievement Award for Professions. Now, the way I got to know her is because she's also an author. And my first sort of exposure to her is with this book, Without Prejudice, which I absolutely loved. And then I met her. And of course, it was wonderful. And it describes the experiences of being a Black female lawyer in Britain, and is a very good read. And the next one will be coming out on the 16th of March, and is called Until Proven Innocent. So I'm giving her I'm giving you advance notice because I believe it is even better than the first one. So thank you, Nicola. Now, I have known Maggie for longer than 2 years, actually, quite a lot longer, because we're both part of another organization. Maggie has been described as gently formidable. She's a voice of reason. Believe it or not, she owns 3 businesses: the Experience Core Limited, Maggie Sample Limited, and iCubed Group Limited. Through the Experience Core, Maggie and her associates work with global organizations on agile approaches, cultural change, inclusion, and leadership development. iCubed coaches companies going through transformation and has partnered with the University of Cambridge and the Voice newspaper on the Black British Voices. Since I'm also at Cambridge, I applaud that. However, the thing that you would be very interested in is Maggie Sample Limited, because this is a lifestyle business that has a simple proposition. Every woman at some point in her professional life needs bespoke clothes. I think it is such a wonderful treat to have clothes made to measure that don't break the bank. And I think that is what Maggie offers. So the sample collection was launched in March 2015, and all garments are made in the Sample Atelier in Covent Garden, so very, very local. So, as I said, something of interest to our audience. And the clothes are made to measure from selected range of designs. Maggie is also a non-executive director on several boards, and that is our common interest here. She's also a fellow of the City and Guilds Institute, one of 500 fellowships awarded since 1878, so quite an achievement. She is cited in International Who's Who and was awarded an OBE in 2001. In June 2022, Maggie became an honorary bencher of Middle Temple Inn. I remember we were having lunch and you had just been appointed and you came in and we raised a glass of bubbly in her honor. So, thank you, Maggie. Welcome. And I would like to ask both of you, because you were the first in a lot of ways. So what is being the first and the experience of being the first means to you? So tell us a little about how you started, what it meant, what were the challenges and the achievements that you had. So shall we start with you, Maggie?
Thank you. So I always say about being the first, someone has to be it. And if that someone is me occasionally, or Nicola occasionally, or other people occasionally, great. I often say also that I wasn't born, I don't think, I didn't enter the world either having to be a warrior or having to be first. But it's very interesting how life has developed that for me, it's quite natural, not only to be gently formidable, but to be really clear why I think the world needs to be better. And I'm unafraid to say so. I'd say it very nicely, I believe, but I'm unafraid to say so. So being the first for me is about when opportunities arise, I don't think, well, I do think sometimes I won't do it because I'm not good enough, but that aside, I won't think I won't do it because I don't want to be the first. That's not a barrier for me. So setting up businesses, because I think there's a need for a particular business, in this case, the fashion label, it came from, literally, from me. What do I now need at a certain stage in my life where, by the way, a female changes her body size 27 times in her life?
Goodness.
And I don't mean we put a bit of weight on here and we lose it, COVID, makes us all stay at home. No, We literally change, not huge amounts, any which way, but we change. So for me, it came really important at one point in my life to say, yeah, I just need clothes that fit me, properly fit me, and I cannot find them in the shop. So that's why I set up the business. And I'm not the first fashion designer. My fashion director is here in front of me, Dulcie. If you want to talk to her later on, she's got lots of ideas. But, wasn't first there. But I guess being in Covent Garden, a number of things make me the first in that way. I ought to say also that I wrote a book originally when we first set the business up. It's called Semple, first edition, and it tells the story of 6 women, all of whom have still in their wardrobes a favourite item of clothing. And I want to know the story behind the clothing, a scarf, a dress, whatever it might be. And that's what I wrote about. So I would say first, didn't wake up, wasn't born to be first, but I don't shy away from being first. I was the first person to be on the national curriculum that actually reformed the education system in the whole of the UK, or England and Wales, I should say, Northern Ireland, of colour, I should say, on those various committees. That's what one does.
But what were some of the challenges that you had to face?
Well, first of all, myself, didn't think I could do it or be it. So constantly talking to myself. Other people perceiving me that I couldn't do it. Maybe I looked a little...
Couldn't do it, why? Because you were a woman? Because you... why?
Yeah, and no one, of course, says this, do they? They don't say to your face, you can't do it because you're a woman or you're a black woman. In fact, people rarely said you couldn't. It's their behaviours
that
suggested to me that there was a doubt in my ability to do something. And I think as a woman, and as a black woman particularly, but maybe many of us, you get pretty attuned pretty quickly in life at what people are saying to you without saying it. And I work in an international context. Many of you, we're in an environment which is international, and everybody knows that... That's time up.
Sorry, I made the big mistake that nobody should make.
Don't worry.
Yes. Yeah, let me just switch it off.
And all I would say in that intervening period is, just to finish the sentence, that in international context, and I was born in London, I'm very British, educated at universities and so on in the UK, but I would say the English language, and I speak other languages too, the English language is quite good at being so nuanced that we're not quite sure, did you really say that? It's so doubt in my mind. So that's what I would say in terms of what made me feel like that. Always the way.
Sorry about that.
No, don't worry. I hope you heard a bit of my end there, which is what made me think that. People's behaviours tell me that I might not be capable of doing things. And because I come from a very strong family, particularly a strong father, he was university educated, all those sorts of things, he would just say to my sister and I, 2 little black girls in London, you do have the abilities. You are capable.
Exactly.
And so on and so on and so on. So,
yes.
Yeah, I would say that's how I managed it.
Thank you. Nicola.
Hello? Is it working? Okay. Well, first of all, can I say you all look amazing from up here? And at some point, I'm going to be rather gauche and just take a photo from up here because you all look so great. The first, yes. Well, I was just thinking as Maggie spoke that it's funny, they say the more things change, the more they remain the same. I think when I first came to the bar, which is longer ago than I'm too vain to admit, but when I first came to the bar, I was, myself and another black woman were the first 2 pupils that my chambers had ever taken on, ever. And that, well, all right, I'll tell you when it was, and that was in 85, 86. And then fast forward to my last, I suppose, full-time job before I decided to change my working pattern and become a part-time judge, which I have been doing for a while, and a writer. When I worked for Defence, when I was the first ever ombudsman they'd had for UK Defence, I was the first ombudsman and the first black woman to do that. So it was a first again. There was a 25 plus year, a long, long time in between those two jobs, but there was still the issue about being the first. What were the challenges with that? There were a lot of challenges with that. If I go back even further than that, when I was at school, this is not a sort of first challenge, but just an insight into the thinking that people had back then, and sadly, I think still persists today. I was at school doing, like Maggie, I'm a Londoner born and raised. My parents are from Guyana, but apart from 4 years between the ages of 10 and 14, and then much later on in life, when I lived in the Cayman Islands, I've always lived and worked and studied and everything in the UK. And I was doing my A-levels, and at the time I wanted to be a linguist at the UN. That's what I wanted to do. And I had a careers teacher who absolutely sat there and looked me in the face and said, "No, I don't think you should do that. I think you should go and work for Woolworths." Yeah. And then, and I have absolutely no reason to lie about this, and then she thought, maybe I'll say something a bit more enlightened. She says, "Well, if you don't want to go and work for Woolworths, you can go and become a nurse." Now, there's absolutely no shade on that, or the nursing profession at all, but the kind of nurse she was thinking about was the one that you could leave school at 16 and go and, not even a qualified nurse, almost like a nursing assistant. And that's what she thought. Now, that was a long time ago, but sadly, I know that there's still some people that do have those sort of limited beliefs about women, about ethnic minorities. If you happen to be like both of those two things together, it's like a double glazed ceiling almost. So from then, in a way though, once you can get past something like that, it gives you a very good grounding for being able to deal with any slings and arrows that you get. Other than that, Maggie's absolutely right. Sometimes people don't tell you to your face, "Oh, you can't do something," apart from that very ignorant teacher. But the attitude is that we don't really expect that you can do it. We think you're going to fail. And you've got to be really quite careful that doesn't get into your subconscious in a way, that you don't start to take that on. Yes, but at the same time, I've always liked a challenge. And people see me and I'm really quiet and the kind of person that, I'm often the person sitting in, my friends who are here will tell you, I could go to a function, I'll be the person in the corner with my glass of wine or something, not really talking to anybody. And people will underestimate me. But I always say, all right, underestimate me. That'll be fun. Just on a last bit with that teacher, she did, after I'd started my degree, the end of the first year, I was working in a shop. I lived in Croydon, there's a local shop in Croydon. She came in and she said, "I'm so glad you found something that was that matched your capabilities." And when I told her, "Well, actually, no, I'm at the end of my first year of my degree and this is not my full-time job," she got bright red in the face, disappeared off in the corner, I never saw her again. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop canter tour for me. Yes, they're always challenging. We knew the first. And it could be because of gender, it could be because of race, it could be for other reasons as well. But whenever you're the first, as Maggie says, somebody's got to be the first. And there's always going to be somebody that's going to tell you, "Oh, no, you can't do it." But then you do what you have to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And can I just, sorry,
Please, carry on.
Chair this, but I'm going to probably not allow you to, because every time Nicola says anything, I think, "Oh, that's an amazing point. That's great." I just want to pick up a couple of points you said. So we're both Guyanese heritage.
I didn't even know that.
I was just thinking that. And that's amazing. I have a theory about that, but we might come on to it later on.
What, the silent but deadly theory?
There's that, but also, I'll say it now then. So it was British Guyana, and there might be people in the room, whoever you are, that come from that part of the world, South America, on the Caribbean coast. And part of the colonization was the education system. And part of the education system meant that Guyana, British Guyana at the time, now Guyana, had a university, it had a grammar schools, and so on. Whether you believe in that or not, that's what it had. It had other schools too. So my father went to the grammar school and so on. His English was better than anyone he met in the UK, I have to tell you, in terms of the grammatical structures, understanding what it's about, and so on. That's colonization, but anyway, that's what it was. So we're both from Guyanese heritage. But for me also, hearing about, so I used to be a teacher as well and a deputy head of a school, but, hearing about that teacher behaving like that, I don't care which era it was in, is kind of even more so today unacceptable, really. My father became the chair. I went to an all-girls school in London, Islington, and my father became the chair of my school ages ago. And I was in the sixth form at the time, and he became the chair. So we had governors' meetings by the sixth form room that I was in. And Mrs. Taylor, I always remember her, the head teacher, used to say very loudly, "Good evening," or "Good day, Mr. Semple." And I think, oh my God, my father's in school. Oh, no, no, no. And he'd come in and so on. But that's how his version of ensuring that all girls, because it was all-girls school, were very multicultural, had the correct, the proper way to be introduced to further life. And not to be, I mean, you can't stop teachers saying what they're saying, but not to have a culture where it's okay to say, whoever you are, because of whoever you are, this is your path in life. Absolutely not. Today is so much more exciting about what someone can be in the future. They might not be doing it right today, but they could be tomorrow. And not to have that hope. That's one thing I say human beings have over anything else. We have hope. And surely we should be putting hope into our young people.
Yes,
Can
absolutely.
you imagine if, Nicola, you've been told you're going to be not only a barrister, but you're going to be the leading this and that. You'd have probably come onto the Supreme Court at some point, wouldn't you? You should have just got further. And that's what I think it's about.
No, I agree with you entirely. I think it's hope, but also a belief that you can do it. I think that's very important, and I think you've both been very lucky in the way you've been brought up, because I think one's parents actually can make a huge difference in giving you that belief that you can achieve what you want to
But
achieve.
imagine a society where it didn't depend on luck. That's what I want. I want a world where it does not depend on luck.
Yes.
Whether you are successful, have opportunities, and so on. Not only is it a right to have it, but also you don't have to need, it's in our world, it's ideal to have parents who love you and all those other things, but sometimes people don't. But they should still feel that there's a belief in them from something, somewhere.
Yes.
I totally agree with you about killing hope. And I think if you do that when it's at a very nascent period, when you've got someone at school, and perhaps they may come from a home where they're being pushed, but they may come from a home where they're not. And the one person that they're supposed to be able to say safely is to a careers teacher and say, well, this is what I'd like to do. And if they just squash that stone dead and they're not getting it from anywhere else, it gets killed off at that age. One of the things I like to do, I haven't done it much since post-COVID because it hasn't really been going that much, is I volunteer for an organisation called Speakers for Schools. And I go into the schools and talk to kids about, well, they wouldn't like me calling them kids, but you know what I mean. I talk to them about, I suppose, my career path. And of course, I'd love everyone to go into the law, but even if they don't want to do that, just to know that it's possible.
Exactly.
And I've had young people come up to me and say, well, what do you do if, you don't have anyone encouraging you at home? And if they have one particular school, I remember that the head of year was like super encouraging to the pupils there. So they were lucky to have him. But as Maggie says, it shouldn't have to depend on luck.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So we've been talking both about being a woman and being black. So I'll ask you a very provocative question. Is sexism worse than racism, or the other way around?
Wow, you have to be brave to answer that question, I reckon. You really do. Nicola, what do you think? You're the barrister.
Okay, I'm happy to tackle that one.
Yes, please.
I think it all depends on who you ask. But I'm going to speak from my perspective.
Yes.
If I think about the whole arc of my life, which has more negatively impacted my life, I would definitely say racism overall. I would say it's that.
Why?
I don't know, you'd have to ask the racists who did it, I guess. I think because, all right, this is, you asked a provocative question,
Yes.
it's my provocative response. I think if you take the people that, well, all right, this is, well, I'm just going to say it. If you think about the person that runs the country, not literally runs the country, but the kind of person it is, it's a white man, middle-aged, probably went to a public school and an elite university.
Agreed, yes.
And is able-bodied and is straight, let's say it's that. If you think about when they're also the ones, if they're heads of companies, they're the ones that will have to be rolling out a diversity program. They would think about, well, you know, women, I understand women should have as much opportunities as I did because I've got daughters, I've got a wife, and I can recognize that. I understand that, you know, I might have a son or a daughter who is LGBT, so, you know, I can picture myself in that situation. And I can picture myself getting older, I can picture myself possibly having a disability, but they can't picture themselves being black.
Yes.
And I think that's the reason why that's why there's been more progress in some aspects of diversity than they have on others. I suppose around religion, depending on what the religion is as well. People can picture themselves being, let's say, for example, Catholic, but they can't picture themselves being Muslim, as an example. So I think that's the reason why racism, that's why, I'm not saying I haven't been subject to sexism, please don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that at all. And I think sometimes if you're a black woman, the two get mixed up together, so you can't really separate them into discrete areas. But I think if I had to think about more instances where I felt slighted or held back in some way, it's been much more to do with my race than it has to be with my gender. The one exception to that was when I worked in the Cayman Islands. I worked there for about 5.5 years. And I hate to say it, that's kind of a sexist place. You know, yes, it is. I mean, there is a friend of mine who also worked in the Cayman Islands. I'm sure she would vouch for that. And they would say things like, I remember when they first started rolling out like sort of sexism training in government. And a member of the then government said, about sexual harassment. I don't need training about sexual harassment. I know how to sexually harass women. And that was something that somebody really said. They're no longer a member of the government, though. You'd be happy to know. So that's my experience.
So it wasn't ironic?
No, it wasn't ironic at all, actually. Yes. So there you go.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So that's my experience. There's been more racism than sexism, but the two are very often interlinked.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Michael, what about you?
Yeah, so I think you've summed that up really well. You speak for me too on that point from what you said. I'm not sure I can add too much more, other than when I work with global businesses particularly, and they have to report in their annual reports on certain stats, pay would be one. You know, because most companies in most nations look at gender as very serious, you know, how many women have they got on their boards, how many women have they got in their workplace, how many are senior executives, and so on. It has only been fairly recently when companies, certainly that I know of, have looked at this thing called race, which is a shorthand for black, actually. Really, it's shorthand for black. And so, for me, the racism part, and I'm making some assumptions here, it's another whole discussion about this, but I'll just do headlines. The racism part then comes that as a business or as a community of people, and you sell products to people, you look at gender as a focus, you understand that as much as you can, but the issue to do with black has come more later in their development, in their evolution, in their way that they do things. So, for example, the gender pay gap, we now know, we see it, we can see it, and many companies now are reporting on the ethnic pay gap too. And what you'll find is on most annual reports they do that, and what I ask companies to do, ethnic pay gap, okay, I get that. Who is in your ethnic pay gap? It's actually everyone who's not white, actually. So can you break that down further? And that's where I get very interested in data. What does the data tell us? So when it comes to sexism, racism, my experience is that racism, it seems to me, more uncomfortable for people to acknowledge, understand, and see it than sexism. And we're talking about binary at the moment here. There's another whole discussion about actually what is sexism, what is it looking at, and racism and everything else. But that's what I would add to your points.
I totally agree.
Yes. I mean, you're on a lot of boards.
Yeah.
And I would say today, sometimes it's ticking the boxes. We need a woman, we need someone black, you tick both boxes at the same time. But what happened at the beginning when you were the first black woman? First black, first woman.
I mean, Eve's just been very provocative there for me because my eyes have lit up several times.
Yeah, I know. When you said tick box, I thought the same.
Yeah.
It's good to be provocative.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Absolutely, and it's a good question, good challenge. So I sit on the board, for example, of Phoenix Group Holdings, major FTSE 100 company. I'm the first black woman to sit on that board in its 100-year existence, and I joined it last June. That's fine. If I had an inkling, well, I want to be emotive about this. If I had an inkling that I was only there because they ticked a box, because the Parker Review was looking at them saying, what have you done in the years that Parker has reported that more people of colour, as they called it there, need to be on boards? 1 by 21 was the slogan at that point. Most FTSE 100 companies, only half of them had got there. So, you know, is it a tick box? And I would want to say with Phoenix, definitely not. The process was rigorous beyond belief, which was quite interesting. But actually, I don't believe, no one makes me feel that I'm there because I'm black, because I might bring a different perspective because I'm black, because actually for some people I'm more British than anyone could possibly be, so that won't work. But if you want me to be there because I'm good at what I do, and for me that's really important, and also I have a contribution to make, of which I've convinced you I have, because that was the interview process, then I'm comfortable. So I've been the first there, I am the first. I don't know if others will follow and so on, but I am the first. But I don't feel that I'm there because of a tick box.
I think that's very interesting and very important because not many organizations would reach that standard, would they?
How do you mean? Sorry.
The fact that what they were choosing was the talent, the skills, the capacity to fill a particular need, a particular position, and being blind to whether one is a woman or whether one is black.
I think it helps them, however, to have a black woman on their board. So they're acknowledging that. But I think also it's about, this is a company that does insurance and so on, an actuary company. Everyone in the building, in the X number of staff, accountants and lawyers and so on, which is great. They didn't want another one of those on their board. They wanted someone completely different, someone slightly entrepreneurial. And that's how, for me, when I saw the information, it had my name on it. I thought, this is me. They're describing me.
Yes.
Someone who hasn't done a straight path to anything. She keeps dabbling in all sorts of things my CV might look like. And that's what I think was the excitement for me. Yeah, I would say that. Nicola, what do you think?
I think when you said tick box, I thought, I don't know if she's been deliberately provocative, but it certainly was provoking. I think because, and I know you didn't mean it in any negative way, but sadly, there are people that would see me or Maggie and they'd see us in our roles and they think, oh, the only reason why she got that was because
Exactly.
she's black. Even, for example, even not even taking us, I didn't watch it, but you know Bake Off, when that young woman, Nadia, won it. People said the only reason why she won it was because she was a Bengali woman. I mean, my God, it's about baking.
Yes,
Yes.
And it's that
you
thinking
either
that
can
I'm
bake
challenging.
Or you can't.
Yes.
And that's one thing, what
Yes.
I mean. So I think, is it an extra cherry on top to be both a woman and black and to have that particular role? I'm sure it would be for the employers or whoever is giving you that role, but you absolutely have to have the intellectual chops to have it. Because I would never apply for anything that I didn't think that I could do. And if anything, I think women, as we all know, we tend to, if we as women can't, if they've got 10 criteria, if we can't match all 10, we probably wouldn't apply for it. And if a man can match 6, he's applying for it. And I know because I've interviewed men who match 6 or less. And the sense of, I don't know, to have that kind of front, it's really quite something. So no, I think for me, I always see it that if any role that I have had or have had in the past or currently hold, because I sit in a couple of boards as well, that's because of what I can bring to the table, my intellectual abilities. But it is an absolute plus for those companies to say, oh, they've got a woman and she happens to be black as well.
Yes.
So, but I mean, what you said about 1 by 21, that's a really low bar, you think about it.
Yeah.
Gosh.
And I guess we're now in 23 and it's saying to
Yeah,
all the
it's
companies...
not 3 by 22, is it? Yeah.
We could do better.
Yes,
Could do better.
absolutely.
Because, sorry to prolong it, because if you wish to be that diverse, if you do wish to specify you want someone of colour on your board, Parker Review, then the retort should not be, but they don't exist. Because there are many, many people of colour out in society that can do a whole load of stuff that have never been recognised, given the opportunity, etc. So when someone says, Maggie, people just aren't applying, I think, don't look at the people, look at yourself. Look at the culture of your organisation. What do you look like, etc. Because there are thousands, millions of people who are different that could sit on for roles in jobs as executives as well as being on boards.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Let me turn the tables on you now.
What, more than you've already done? Okay, all right, yes.
What are you doing to help other women?
That's good. Okay, well, I'll have a stab at that. I would probably put it more in the general context of, I do believe in paying it forward. I really do. So I'd probably put it in a more of a general context about what I'm doing. One was about Speakers for Schools. I say that because the schools, I haven't been to an all-girls school, but I've definitely been to schools that have an equal balance, male and female. And most of the people that come up afterwards to talk to me are young women who usually want to follow in my profession. I have mentored young women in the past. I not currently do it right now, but I have definitely done that in the past. And I belong to organisations like Women on Boards, for example. I belong to the, oh gosh, I've forgotten the name of the acronym, International Women's Forum, and with a subgroup of that for the International Women's Forum, Women of Colour. And I appreciate why you've asked me that, and it is good because I do think you're not just there to sit there and, well, I've done it all now.
Exactly,
and everyone
yes.
else can manage. But those are the kind of things that I do.
Great, thank you. Mike?
And I guess what I do, in a similar vein, is for organisations that I'm associated with, networks and so on, I will offer kind of a quasi-relationship of coaching. So that if someone's interested in finding out, Maggie, so how did you do that, and so on, I'm willing to do that. That's what I've done, and that's what I do, particularly for women. And usually they're women, to be honest, over a certain age. Just like the brand, the clothing brand, you know, it comes to when a woman becomes quite senior, either in her work or in years, there might be some life changes to make, and just want to listen to somebody else, just to hear what they have to say from experience. So I would say most of the women I work with are going to be over 40 on the whole. We just go for a coffee, we go for a walk. I mean, I did do just on Cambridge, because I know you know, so I'm very associated with Cambridge University. And I did for the then Chancellor, who's no longer there, he's just left this autumn, ran a reverse mentoring scheme for him and his senior people. And I say this just because it was to do with enabling the senior team to understand better about race, particularly from an academic's point of view and also a student point of view at Cambridge. And one of the things that Stephen, his name was, the Chancellor, would find very interesting is to go for walks with some of his professors who were highly regarded throughout the world for who they were, to hear their experiences of life living in Cambridge. And they go for walks around Cambridge. And it was quite eye-opening how people treated a white man in this case and a black woman or a Brazilian woman. It's just quite interesting. It just was a good starting point for discussion.
Yes.
So for me, I call it quasi-coaching because I don't want to be too heavy necessarily, but it is about, let's just talk about what we've been doing and let's have a coffee, let's meet.
But you also coach other women to become, non-executive directors.
I do. So if someone wants to become a NED, independent NED, non-executive director, then I have, through organisations, coached people on things that actually the job description doesn't tell you, a search company won't tell you, but the reality of what it is to apply for something like this. And I'll suggest to you what you might need to do to make yourselves more marketable in this area, if that's what you wish to do.
Thank you. Let's now look over the years and think how things have changed and evolved, not just for women, but women of color when starting a business or when starting in a profession that's so demanding like the law. And also then cast your mind forward, so both back and forward. What can you foresee in 20 years' time? So what has changed since you started, and how do you see things changing in the future?
Is this generally or in our particular professions, like me in the law and Maggie in business, or what?
Whichever you prefer. I mean, in the law or more generally. But let's start with the law first, because that's your expertise.
Okay. Well, when I first came to the bar, it's funny because I came to the bar in the mid-'80s, and so it's like a long time ago and yet not a long time ago. But it was, you still had, for example, the chambers where I did my pupillage, where myself and another black woman were the first two black pupils of any gender that they'd ever taken on. They had also taken on just before us, the first female tenant. So she was, I know, it was that bad. It was actually a very good chambers in terms of the work that it did, but, and in some ways it was quite typical of lots of chambers at the time. There was, you know, even at that point, women were just coming in. You'd have like one or two in chambers, and then you get no ethnic diversity at all. You'd also get, because, again, I suppose people don't want to talk about these things, but it was an absolute fact, as late as the mid-'80s, and even later than that, you would have all black sets of chambers because they weren't getting taken on in white sets of chambers. But that's not the worst bit. The worst bit was that they were referred to as ghetto chambers. Yeah, they were actually referred to as that. Now, not, they weren't supposed to call it that, put it that way.
No, it is
but
the
that
informal,
was
yes.
a term that, that people were using. Now, that situation, if you get a group of black barristers that want to set up a chambers together, it's not because they can't get in somewhere else. So that it's a choice that they made. Maybe they're friends and they want to do that. The term ghetto chambers you wouldn't hear. In terms of female and ethnic representation, that is much, much better. Oh, and also back in the day, you wouldn't. There was no such thing as a black QC or KC now, or a black person sitting on a bench in any capacity.
Goodness.
And that has changed. It could change. It could be better, but that has changed. We don't have any black people in the Supreme Court. We have only just recently had women in the Supreme Court, and when they go, like the lovely Baroness Hale, who I think is the most amazing, her and Michelle Obama are my two favorite women that I admire because she's such a lovely lady. She really is. And so. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought. So, and even with that, there was a point when she had come off and Lady Arden had come off. I think they only had one person, then they had none, and I think they've now got one again. So we're still at that point in the Supreme Court, and that is for gender. We haven't even got onto ethnicity because it is not ethnicity. There are no people of color in the Supreme Court.
Yes.
Or in the Court of Appeal. So, which is where the feeder, that's where you tend to get it from. What I would like to see in 20 years' time, well, this is quite sort of dear to my heart because I'm old enough to have a great niece. And she's going to be one in the day after my book comes out. I know, she's really gorgeous. So when I think about what her life will be like in 20 years' time, hopefully, I mean, I would like to think that sexism and racism would have disappeared. It won't. But the very obvious barriers won't be there. That much I can see, because even with my niece, her mother, I could see from the time that she was born to now how things have changed for her. So things are changing. It would be churlish of me to say that they're not. But the speed at which they are changing is a bit worrying. Coming back to what Maggie said about 1 in 21, I mean, we shouldn't really have companies praising themselves for having one board member in 2021, because one ethnic minority board member can only do so much.
Exactly.
And then you get that feeling about the only one. You really need a bit of a critical mass. You need about 2 or 3. It's a bit like having a jury. If you've got a jury and leaving race or anything out of it, if you've got a jury and there's one person thinks one way and the other 11 think the other way, you're going to get a majority verdict. If you want something really different, you've got to have 3 or 4 thinking one way, and then the other 8 thinking another way. It's similar to that. But I do think things will get better. It's the critical thing is the speed at which they get better. Yes.
And that's primarily UK or England, or can you see it further abroad?
Well, I was thinking about the UK actually, because the only other experience I have of another country, like living there as an adult, would have been when I worked in the Cayman Islands, because I did live in Guyana, but that was when I was a child. And in Cayman is a completely different kettle of fish altogether, because the thing that really counts there is money. So that more than they have their issues around race too, and they don't talk about it. But the thing that really makes the mark there is money. How much are you a working person, a well-off person, a millionaire, or a billionaire? That's pretty much the categories they're thinking about. That's pretty much it. But within the UK context, I think things have definitely improved, and I think they will get better. But as I said, is the speed at which they get better. And actually, on one other point, one thing that I think will help to make things better, particularly what you said about boards, Maggie, is granularity in figures. Because I think people, I know with the military at one point they were saying, oh, yes, we've got quite a bit of ethnic diversity. I said, okay, well, let's break those figures down. How many of them are foreign and Commonwealth troops as opposed to British? Majority of foreign and Commonwealth. How many, and in some other ways you could say, well, how many are, because I think sometimes it is useful to talk about black and ethnic minorities, and sometimes you have to make it more granular. How many are within judicial appointments, for example? How many people are black, Asian, whatever other visible ethnic minority? Because you're not really going to see real progress unless you can see the granularity of all those. So sometimes it's nice to talk about things in the round, but sometimes you need to break it down a bit more.
Thank you. Maggie, I know you've been taking some notes, so...
Well, otherwise I'll just get too excited and forget what I want to say. But also I've just found out about... So actually, just on Guyana again, I've not ever been to Guyana.
Sorry, little Guyanese, little tete-a-tete here. I'm happy to say that since they've discovered oil off the coast of Guyana, and the good thing about that is, I mean, there's always dangers with rapid development and everything, but the good thing about that is you couldn't get a direct flight to Guyana, but you now can from this April. It'll be a long flight, but you don't have to change in Barbados, Trinidad, Atlanta, whatever, and run the risk of losing your luggage and all the rest of it. So there you go.
Wow. That's an action point for me. I should be getting at it. Just on terms of kind of 20 years ago, as things changed, how fast, how slow, 20 years' time, what do we think and look like? I was just a couple of things why I was taking some notes, because you talked about the ghetto chambers, and why was that necessary? Not to call it that, but for people who were different to form their own. And if any of you work in the corporate sector particularly, but in any organisation, in government, it could be in a department, for me, it's about, why do people feel that they need to form groups to belong to things? Why is it in an environment where you work that, I'll call it crudely, black staff networks, there's a parenting network, there's a gender network? Why is that the case? And usually it's the case because the provision by X, whoever it might be, the body, is not sufficiently geared up for you. So calling it whatever you call it, but having black barristers come together to form their own, absolutely, at that time, would make complete sense to me without being over-biased about it. Absolutely, because that's where the opportunities were going to be. So when I set my business up, one of them 20 years ago, I worked at Millennium Dome, which was another whole story, and I was one of the directors at the year 2001 when the Dome closed, or 2000. I was one of few directors, there were 2 left. There was no scandal about, I still say yet, no scandal about in the press. I didn't run off with the money. And all those sorts of things. And I was on the radio and TV quite a lot, and people would say to me things like, do you think you're ever going to work again? And I go, yeah. And what was interesting was businesses then started, global businesses, why I set my business up, started contacting me to say, you must be pretty resilient. To have really the UK government and the press haranguing you as a body, as an entity, for 3 consistent years, you have to be pretty resilient personally. And I kind of said, yeah, there were some other issues, but absolutely, you have to be. So having networks, people to come together to belong, is really important. And for me, part of my work, 20 years ago when I set my business up after the Dome, and still today, it's still going as a consultancy, is that more and more people need to feel they belong to things. They want to feel that they are cared for. We're not asking for handouts or anything like that. We sort of belong to something because we're all tribal at the end of the day. We like to belong to this network. That's great. We like to belong to the RSL, whatever it might be. We like to belong to things. So at work, why can't we belong to things without anyone else making a judgment? So that was just on 20 years ago. And I guess today, and I've just stopped being a member of the Queen's Council, that now is called King's Council, that recommends appointments for barristers, people like the wonderful Nicola, to become KCs. And in my short time, 6 years, I know, this year wasn't so good, but I know the number of applicants who were of ethnic minority heritage increased, and a number were more successful. And that was not because I was sitting there, because I wasn't the only person advocating these people, because we have, like every other organisation, information about people that we don't know what their ethnicity really is. That's not important at that point of view. Some people we do know. So the KC process has got better, still has more to do, but it's open to it. 20 years ago, my biggest challenge was not capitalising my business, the capital involved. That was comfortable for me, and I privately put into it. But getting contracts from people was difficult. Just because
In all three businesses?
No, just the first one, which I set up in 2004.
Right.
My first consulting business, 2004. In those days, it was really hard. You could have a fantastic idea for a business. You knew you could see what the opportunities were, but very few businesses, your clients therefore, your suppliers, would actually contract with you. And sometimes I had to go through another body in order to win a contract. So that's changed.
So when you say you, contract with you, do you mean you as an individual?
No, the business.
Or the business?
The business,
right.
Yeah, no, my business, but the business. And I had a track record, but I just needed, it would appear, a greater business that had more credibility than mine, or whatever it might be. That's changed. For me, that's changed. So I set up a recent business called iCubed, 2020, after George Floyd, and that's not been easy, but it's been easier to win contracts. So there's a mood there that's changed. So set up contracts, suppliers, difficult 20 years ago, not so difficult today. I tell you what I do think's changed, and I think it's quite tragic that I have to say this, but it took George Floyd, 2020, May, to be murdered in order for many, many businesses to think, what are we doing around this area? What does our website look like? And for me, that's been the change. So for humanity, for us, it seems as if we need major catastrophes in order to really have a real change, almost over, not revolution, but just change overnight. And that, for me, was a starting point for discussion. So that's what made the change. That has escalated all sorts of people on social media saying, well, for the first time, there were global wars the other evening in the US, and the compare of it just said, a few years ago, before George Floyd, nobody knew him, he was a comedian, and nobody would ask him ever to compare the globes. Today, he's there. And he said it took 2020 for that to happen. I look at films, so that's the reality of it all, really. Prior to 2020, I would say, we were ticking along okay. UK, I'm talking about particularly now, in terms of diversity and different businesses. George Floyd happened, most of the world went upside down, and everyone had a conscience suddenly, and people started thinking, what are we doing? And that's when, again, I set up this business, iCubed, because I thought there was an opportunity.
And what about your hopes for the future, your predictions?
I do have some, yes. So I mean, I really do believe in your 1-year-old. Oh, my word. I don't want to wait that long, but can you imagine what that person will look like or be like and think like when they are 12, 15, 30? I mean, just amazing. So 20 years' time, I'm hoping that those of us in this room will also be very open to what the 20-year-olds coming up at the moment are thinking and saying. So I sat at the board meeting recently, and we're looking at some legal documents, and they changed one phrase, he, she, into they. So my point was, oh, I thought this is quite interesting. So I made the point at the board meeting, as we've done it in this page 1 of this document, can we make sure that all the documents to do with our governance echo this? And also, I see on page 14, because you read your papers for board meetings, of course, there's he, she still. Surely we should have they. And the response I got was, no one quite said Maggie, because remember, we don't say it quite, but people were saying to me, stop being so PC, because, you know, we're a business and we've got things to do. So in 20 years' time, I'm expecting the things that we might find challenging at the moment, just in terms of language, that's my academic study, language, and what we find challenging won't be. So someone with their pronouns might be a huge irritation for any of us in this room. You know, possibly in 20 years' time, everyone's going to go, what did we go on about in 2022, 23?
Thank you, Maggie. Right, this is the last question, because I would like to give the floor to the audience to ask their questions as well. I would like to ask you to suggest a couple of ideas of what the audience can do to help Black women.
So, no, that's absolutely fine. So I would say, be honest with yourself, look at your phone and look at how many people in your phone contacts we're all doing crude here, so I'll just say a Black. That's quite crude, but are very different from you. Look at your phones. If you can't see any, or you have one compared to 300, I call it check the ratio. Check the ratio. And ask yourself, why is that the case? That's the first thing you can do. A thing you can do, not the first. Why is that the case? Because if you looked at my book, my phone, and you looked at all the people in, I could be able to go male, female, binary, and black, white, you know, and so on, or Iranian, whatever I might be able to say. I could say that probably, but there'll be a mix. So here I am with a mix. I'm hoping that you too will have a mix. Because what that tells me is if you have a mix of people in your phone, some of them are your friends, some of them are not, some are business contacts, some are, you know, your Waitrose delivery, I don't know. But you actually acknowledge for yourself who is in your network on your phone. That's one thing you could have a think about. I think whoever you are, and I'm saying this because we have a publisher, actually the same as yours. It's all top secret, actually, so I've just let it out. But anyway, we're writing a second book on the language of race. And one of the things we say, a tip for people, is whoever you are, we call it allyship. Some of you will have heard this. You know, it goes beyond friends, but you know, when you see something in the press, when you read about Meghan and Harry and all that stuff, what do you think? What do you really, be honest with yourself. Again, back to your honesty. What do you think? And whatever you think, have a discussion with yourself and then with a friend and other friends about why. Whatever you think about that, for example. Find allies. People that might think the same as you and look the same as you. Fantastic. And we've got a very multicultural, I can see just from whether you look, very kind of culturally different kind of representation here in the room. But also, if you can, find people that think differently from you, or you believe they do, until you start talking to them. You know, I lost friends when we started talking about Brexit. I couldn't believe what people were saying about Brexit. I won't even go there now because I might lose some of you too. But, you know, it's that sort of thing. So we say, and I say, encourage you to look at your phones and also to find allies, people that think like you, as you believe, and people that don't. And how would you find them? you'll find your own way. You might belong to a book club. I've got no idea. You might be in work and you've got a water cooler that you go and you talk about things and so on. Whatever it might be, find someone different, and they become you are then an ally for what that person is trying to achieve in their lives by understanding more.
I agree with you entirely, because I find that if all the people surrounding you are of exactly the same mindset, it doesn't challenge your own brain very much. You need to have people who actually disagree with you so that it sharpens your own thinking. And why do you think that particular way? And I think it's important to have that diversity, to have others in your group of acquaintances that are different.
And just before Nicola comes in, just say one last point. I don't have the luxury to only have a contacts list of people like me. I will not be able to function in society if that's what I only had. If you have, that's a privilege.
Yes. Well, first of all, what she said, all those points. But also, just to add, don't, and again, I can't find an elegant way to express it, so I'm just going to say it. Don't feel, and this is to the non-black women in the audience, don't feel that you have to tiptoe around black women. Because if you do that,
very important,
you're actually treating us as, you're othering us.
Absolutely.
You're treating it as the other. You know, we're women.
Yes,
so that's the one thing
exactly.
we have in common. We might have different experiences as women, but we're women. So don't tiptoe around us, and don't think that, oh, I can't say anything because I might offend.
Yes.
And in fact, I had an interesting conversation about that. And my view, this is a personal view about this, you might inadvertently say something that offends. But people will, I think it's less likely to happen as time goes on, but also people know if your question or your comment comes from a good place. They know that. We can also, as a black, I certainly can, I'm sure Maggie can as well, you can also tell when it's not coming from a good place. You absolutely can. Or when people are just being downright rude.
Yes,
you can tell that.
absolutely.
But you can absolutely tell if someone has said something that they misspoke, or they're asking about something. They can do that. That's not that's not an issue. Like, for example, as an example, I mean, I'm not talking about the Lady Hussey situation. I really am not. But, people might want to ask about a black woman's hair, because there's lots of different ways we do our hair. If you're asking about hair, you're just asking about it. Depending how you ask, no one's going to get offended by that. They really aren't. If you ask somebody, I suppose it is a Lady Hussey thing, if you ask somebody where they're from and they tell you, then nobody's going to be offended by you asking that. If you keep persisting because you don't get the answer you want, that might be different.
Yes.
But that's I'm actually not.
Yes.
I know I use that as an example. I'm absolutely not trying to pillory anybody involved in that. I'm just trying to say there's a difference between asking a question that's coming from a good place and maybe asking something in such a way is not really coming from a good place. So don't other black women. But other than that, I completely endorse what Maggie said.
Absolutely. Thank you both very much. Now we'll open it to the floor. I believe there should be another microphone. If someone can come and hand the microphones out, please. Can you just put your hand up if you have a question, and I will... Yes, Jenny. Wait until the microphone comes to you, please. Oh, okay, all right. If you need to, yes, the speakers will share the one, yeah. So is Jenny over there in the mask?
Hi, that was an absolutely fascinating
Can't hear you.
That was an absolutely fascinating discussion to listen to, and absolutely in awe about, how all the difficulties that you've had in place. But when you first started talking, both of you, about the problems that you had encountered during your school years and your university years, it took me back to growing up in the 50s and 60s, when society's attitudes towards women was very restricted And when I left school in 1968, you could either be a nurse, a teacher, or a secretary. And that was it. And what you've done is that actually you've got the double whammy of not only the attitude towards women, but the attitudes towards people of colour as well. My first introduction to people of colour were the West Indian cricket team in 1963. And it was the most wonderful experience because they were the best cricketers in the world. You never thought of them as anything other than wonderful cricketers. And the people in the crowd, they played calypsos and all the rest. It was the most wonderful introduction to people of colour. But my concern is this, and I wonder if you have any insight or advice as to what to do in primary schools. As you probably well know, children are influenced in their beliefs by what their parents believe. Many parents have set views and do not think any way around those points of view. So you've got children growing up whose parents can be extremely prejudiced, but they don't discuss it. Therefore, you have children in primary schools who are racist, not because they know what it means, but it's what their parents mean. And given the current national curriculum, I know it is now including Black history and so on, but it's a very narrow curriculum, and children, unless they have the facilities at home, are by and large not being taught to think. And my feeling is that, if people are prejudiced from the age of 4 or 5, it's extremely difficult to undo that prejudice, particularly if they don't understand where it's come from and how to deal with it. So my question is how, I see this as a problem which goes right back to birth. Interestingly enough, in the last maternal mortality report, which was published in November, Black and Asian women comprised the majority of maternal deaths.
Okay.
So there's inequality right from the word go. But how on earth can you tackle this business of innate prejudice and encouraging children to think and embrace children from all other walks of life?
Okay, that's enough. Thank you, Jenny.
Right.
Yes.
Well, I'll go first just because I've got the mic.
Right.
I think that the number one thing that will change that is, well, I should say as a precursor to my response, is that it depends where the children are. If you're talking about London or Birmingham or any big city, the chances are that the primary school population will be very diverse. If you're talking about, and no offense to Cumbria or anything like that, but if you talk about Cumbria, Northumberland, you could probably go to schools where they're very, very largely white or monocultural, I suppose would be the proper way of saying it. But the number one thing that will change that is a diverse teaching staff. Because if you've got ethnic minority teachers, and also I think a really strong argument could be made for male primary school teachers as well, because it is a female-led profession, which I think is wonderful in many ways, but I think if you've got boys and girls mixed up, it's good to see that. But I think the number one thing that will change that is a diverse teaching staff. But other than that, I'm actually, for the primary school age kids, they're the ones that give you the most hope because they are the most open and the most embracing of difference, whether that's on race or on sexuality or anything like that. They really are the most embracing of difference as a general rule. And kids, their minds are malleable, so they might have racist parents at home, but if they're exposed to something different, I think you can challenge that. So that would be what I'd say.
And thank you. And I would say also, just on the cricketers' point, just an anecdote here, and the West Indian cricket team, I'm not a cricketing person or a sporty person necessarily, but several decades ago, when I was deputy head of a large school in London, and one of my student teachers came Her name was Nancy Gomez. Tall, 6-footer, blonde hair, blue eyes. Great. And then she spoke. She was so Trinidadian, it was unbelievable. And there was me, sounding like I do. But not only was that, her dad was, I think, something Gomez, Larry Gomez or something, was her father. White, blue-eyed, blonde-haired family. Absolutely amazing in Trinidad. So the West Indies, the Caribbean, has always been diverse. We know that. And in Guyana too, very, very diverse. When we then come to little ones in our schools, every time if I was running a different country, this was a workshop with me in my business, and I would say to you, okay, so how do you know the language of race changes? Most people in the room will put their hands up and say, oh, our children tell us. They say what we shouldn't be saying. They're the ones that are in touch with it more. So I have great hope for 4-year-olds in primary schools and 5-year-olds. Don't forget, of course, yeah, they might come from home backgrounds which have particular views, of course. But the media around them is saying other things too. So, little ones watching TV, playing games, in their cots, their parents put the phone there and there's little people singing songs. They tend to be more multicultural and more open to people of difference than previously. So I still have great hope. There will be pockets, you're quite right, of people, parents in this case, who don't want this at all, understanding difference, and there'll be a whole load of children, absolutely, but I think that there's a majority of young people will be exposed to a whole range of things, which gives me great hope. It really does. Just look at any TV program. If in the first 30 seconds you don't see someone of colour, in my house the TV goes off now, because come on, what is it? It's Bridgerton. People say, Maggie, look at Bridgerton. It's got all the wrong people in the wrong place. And I go, not so sure. So I think there are loads of books, wonderful books, written by mainly black female authors that I know of for nursery children about racism and colour and difference. But it's a point, but it's I think hopefully it'll get better.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you keep it short, please, because
I'll do my very best.
Questions in.
I will do my very best. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much, Nicola, for inviting me to this, because it has been an awesome experience to hear both of you talk on these subjects. And these are things that, as you, Nicola, know, are very close to my heart. So much you've said resonates. For example, attempting to get into a slip this morning that I've had for ages and ages, body does change 27 times. I just couldn't manage it, wouldn't get past my hips. So what you said about changing for the little children, influencing at that stage, I think we're doing it now. Having forums like this is so important. And I think it's a matter of, I'm not sure, I think it was you who said it, people being open. But it's not only from the ally side. I think we also need to learn a bit more patience. I do understand we're tired. We are tired. I've just finished reading a book called Black Fatigue. But the reality is that if we want to move this thing on, we need all of us to be open to understanding the nuances that Nicola pointed out. Whether it's coming from a good place or a bad place, we all know that. And what we need to do is to be able to handle it either way. It's for all of us to be learning and growing together. That is how I feel about it. Now, my question to you, please, very quickly, is you were talking about tick boxes. I happen to be on the board of one of the largest choirs, and I'm the first black person on it. It pretty much was a tick box. As you said, the George Floyd thing really triggered them, and something was done about it. A report was written. People really wanted to get on board with this. The website has changed. Do you really believe that it is wrong to go into a role because it's a tick box thing? I mean, they bent over backwards to say, no, it's because of your particular characteristics, etc., what you'll bring to the board. But is it wrong to actually take up the post and do your best in it? At least you've got the opportunity.
Definitely not.
Thank you.
It is not wrong. For me, I would urge you, if you and I were having coffee together, I would go, it's much better, my temperament, to be inside the tent than outside of it. So if I'm going to be there on a tick box, I'll be quite angry about being there on a tick box, but that won't stop me, whatever I need to do to be there. And I'll be there, and that's when I should want to see some change. So I don't think it's not wrong for you to want to be in that situation. It's not good that the organisation has declared that in a way that they have. But I would say it's not wrong.
And I would totally agree with Maggie. I mean, if the organisation, if, for example, when I was working for Defence, they thought, oh, yeah, we've got a black woman. And I can tell you, they were quite surprised that a black woman even applied for that job. But let's say that's what they thought, then we tick 2 boxes. Whatever they expect is one thing, but what I know I can do is something else. And if that gives me just opens the door a smidge so I can get in it, but then operate in the way that I would operate in anyway, then I don't see anything wrong with that, because I don't, maybe there's some examples of it, but I personally have never come across, let's say, a black person who is, say, black and female, who I can say only got that job because they were black and female and did not have the intellectual chops to do it. I've never come across that, ever. Yes. So that's why I get really upset when people say, oh, well, of course, well, you know why you got it. Well, they got it because they were good. Yeah. If the black and the female and whatever other aspect of diversity is on top of that, well, that's the icing on the cake for whoever it is. But everyone I know had the intellectual chops to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I agree with you that it is better to be in and make the change from inside than not. I believe that very much so. And another, yes? And please keep it to a question.
Brief question. Nicola, if I may ask you, you didn't mention, I think, if you had a strong back...
No, I can't hear you either.
Oh, sorry. Now? Can you hear me now? Nicola, I wanted to ask you if... I don't think you mentioned...
Stand? It may be better, thanks.
No. No, I just wanted to ask you about your background in so far that did your parents support you in your quests and goals and aims in life in terms of career? And yeah, because I didn't quite catch this. I understood Maggie had that background, but did you have that as well? And did you have like a role model? Did you have someone you were looking up to and you modeled your life on? Or?
Okay, well, thank you for asking me that. Yes, my parents were incredibly supportive. Well, I was one of those like specky swat kind of kids, I will say that. And so, but in my family it was, well, you know, no one's leaving school at 16. You're going to go on to do something else. That was absolutely understood in my family. And that's exactly, I have 2 younger brothers, and that's exactly what happened as well as with me. And I mean, my youngest brother, he was a first as well. He's an accountant. He worked for Calvin Klein. He had the Southeast Asia book, and he was out there first, you know, always the only black person on the bullet train in Japan, that kind of thing. So yes, I absolutely did get that support, and it helped because with the first anecdote I gave about the careers teacher, when I came back and told my parents, I said, oh, well, doesn't matter what she thinks. You know what we expect. You know what you can do. So that was one. And with regards to role models, I know it's going to sound really soppy, but I think my first role models were both of my parents, but possibly slightly more my mother. I said, because she's a woman, that's one thing. She's still alive, she's elderly, still alive, mind very sharp. My dad sadly passed, but my mum's still alive. And because both of them were, if you like, Windrush generation migrants, and came to England at a time when racism was endemic and common, and they had to deal with that, but still not be embittered by it, and still want the best for their children going forward. So I think that absolutely is, that's my role model. Thank you.
Role model for me, is that what you're... Yes. Just looking at me. Just so that, very quickly, role model for me has to be my mum too. She's passed some time ago. She was a native Indian woman of Guyana, hence the bangles. You
Ah,
yeah, I've got 5 bangles, of which 3 are about 100 years old. They go from female to female. My sister has 3, I have 3. And they're carved, the Guyanese gold. My mother, native Indian. So when you look at her, you think she was, well, she was actually, but native Indian to Guyana. She was my role model. She was. She used to look at my sister and I. Actually, I think I'm quite a quiet person, really. I know, yeah, it's quiet. But I am, really, deep down. I don't need a lot of noise in my life, usually. But my mother used to look at my sister and I. My sister's name's Eve, lively one. Margaret is a pearl. And she'd look at us and go, where did you 2 girls come from? I mean, you're just so different from me. My mother was quiet beyond belief. She was very dignified, gracious. I thought actually people took advantage of her because she was so nice. And I used to go, Mum, just tell them in the shop to shut up. And no, we don't do that. We don't do it. So for me, my mother was the one that taught me this inner calmness and to be just as good as you can possibly be. Be kind is what she taught me, even though sometimes coming here this morning I wasn't so kind to someone, but you know, I do remember her. I hear her every time I move my hands because I wear these bangles every single day. So that's my role model.
thank you. I think that's a wonderful note to end on. No, we can't take any more questions now. So Susan, if you'd like to, Fazana, right. So while Fazana is getting herself into the right place, I want to thank you both. I know that you will be thanked formally in a moment, but I want to thank you personally because knowing you two has been such a pleasure. And having you here today, it's been amazing because we have actually explored areas we have not explored before, even though some of it we've gone round the edges. So thank you both very, very much indeed for being absolutely wonderful speakers. Two more thank yous. One is to Victoria Trilinska, who has in fact helped me a lot in identifying and inviting these wonderful ladies. So thank you, Vicky, very much indeed for all your contributions, because we've had a lot of discussions to develop the questions, etc., and Vicky has made a huge contribution. So thank you, Vicky. And finally, I would like to thank you all for being here today. I think 130 people registered, and I believe there are at least 120 in this room. And I think this is wonderful for a January GM. So thank you. Fazana.
Yes, I just would like to thank both.
Yes.
I'd like to thank both Nicole and Maggie for such inspirational, discussion, and thank you, Eve, for leading this discussion. So, as a token of gratitude, I'd like to present our guest speakers with 1-year complimentary membership, and I hope you get to use this club and bring your friends and guests. Thank you.
Amazing. You know, I was just thinking, as I was kind of walking around the building, I thought, I was going to say to Dulcie, do you think we should become members of this? It's wonderful. Thank you so much. Oh, it's far too generous. Oh.
And I hope you'll make use of your honorary membership.
Thank you. I certainly will.
We have such an amazing variety of events and activities that I'm sure you will find some that attract you.
Thank you so much. I mean, I'm a bit overcome. I really wasn't expecting this, and you've all been an amazing audience. And I should say thank you to Eve, because you and Victoria together, you got me and Maggie together, and it's been, you should give yourself a hand too.
Thank you.
And just, sorry, just one last thing. So normally when I get things like this, I think, who can I gift it to? I'm keeping this one. That's just so you know. Not gifting this one at all, Dulcie.
So I'd like to announce our upcoming events. Next month in February, on 9th of February, we'll be having Rachel Fowler for our general meeting, who is an interior designer as well as a well-being coach, and she'll be in conversation with myself. So I hope you join this general meeting next month, and it will be in the same venue, which is the Royal Overseas League. I would also like to announce some vacancies we have. So if you have time and would like to volunteer, we've got membership co-leader, assistant treasurer, assistant general meeting organizer, and Facebook administrator. So I really hope that somebody will step in for one of these roles. Please email me at president at kcwc.org.uk for further information. So before we close the meeting, I would like to thank you all for joining us today. And I would like to invite our activity leader liaison, Kathleen, who would be announcing some of the activities. And also for the lunch later at this beautiful Mayfair townhouse, we have some free spaces. So if you'd like to join, please contact Lamise. Lamise, where are you? Oh, there's Lamise, yeah. So if you'd like to join the lunch, please contact her because we've got few free spaces. Thank you all, and see you in one of the next events of KCWC. Thank you.
I'm a little daunted following up on these two inspirational women and very accomplished women with some activities of a slightly lighter nature. Janice Toft, our activity leader for Bark in the Park, has organized 3 dog walking events for the 10th, 23rd of February, and the 1st of March. And if enough of you are interested, she could also put on an event in January. And Bark in the Park gets my vote for the best named activity and the best disclaimer, which is dog is not obligatory. So if you fancy a walk in the park, kindly contact Janice. On the theme of walking, Country Walks has planned 4 walks focusing on various sections of the Thames Path. And the first of these will be held next Tuesday, the 17th, and then on the following 3 Tuesdays, other sections will be explored. All the details of this and signing up are all available on the website. And thanks to Stephanie Guillette for organizing that. She's our leader for Country Walks. For those of you who prefer dancing to walking, I'm delighted to say we have 2 dance activities, one of which is new and one of which is now come back to us. And they're both variations on the theme of moving to and feeling the beat. So Dancing Together is our pre-existing dancing with Elisabetta Stolfi, and that's on Thursday mornings. The registration is online, and it's a 1-hour drop-in. And then our new dance activity is Latin dance, and some of you may have met Jenny upstairs. Jenny's a new member, and so welcome to Jenny. Not only did she join, but she jumped right in with both dancing feet, and she has set up Latin dance, which is salsa, more the learning about this. I'm sporting, not dancing, and more the international type dancing you would know and see on Strictly Come Dancing, and that's Monday afternoons. And it starts in February, and again, details are online. So from exercising our bodies to exercising our minds, Art History is holding a lecture on art, patronage, and power in Renaissance Florence and Venice. And that's on Wednesday, the 1st of February. Again, details on the website. And thanks to Susan Alum, who has organized this. Our book club, led by Sarah Colby, has organized 2 book group meetings and lunch get-togethers, one for the 20th of February and the other for 20th of March. Details, including the titles of the books, are on the website. And lastly, if all the walking, dancing, and learning makes you hungry, After 6 is holding a dinner at Jeru, which is a fine Middle Eastern restaurant in Mayfair, on Tuesday, March 14th. And it's a lovely full menu and glass of bubbles. All the details for that are on the website. And thanks to Alison Wacker for organizing that. And those are some of the activities coming up, but there's lots and lots of very exciting things on the website, so please do check things out. We have some new activities and lots going on, lots to keep all of you busy, and we look forward to perhaps being able to see either of you at one of the activities as well. Thank you. Thank you.
So I think that's the end of our proceedings. And those of you going to lunch, you now need to go to lunch. See you in February. Yes.
Do you have a photo of your little self?
Sorry, what?
Did you take a photo?